When the lights flicker, what walks among us? They say darkness hides things, but what if it is the thing, waiting for the lights to fail before it can truly step out of the shadows? I've spent 20 years upholding the law, but some nights, the calls don't make it into any incident report, and the silhouettes we chase are in flesh and blood. The air in the 14th Precinct station house felt thicker than usual, a familiar, stale scent of lukewarm coffee, old paper, and disinfectant. Detective Anya Sharma ran a hand over her close-cropped hair, a returning officer in a city that had both changed and stubbornly refused to. The night shift was a necessary evil, a purgatory between the day's chaos and the dawn's promise, and tonight, it felt particularly heavy. Her partner, Detective Lena Petrova, a woman whose quiet competence belied a sharp intellect, was methodically checking the patrol car logs at the desk. "Anything exciting on the scanner, Lena?" Anya asked, her voice low, a practiced blend of professionalism and weariness. She pulled on her Kevlar vest, the familiar weight settling against her ribs. Returning to this precinct after a stint in a specialized task force felt like stepping back into a well-worn, slightly uncomfortable uniform. The cases had been different there, stranger, yes, but contained within defined parameters. Here, the mundane often masqueraded as the extraordinary. Lena didn't look up from her paperwork. Same old. A few noise complaints down on Miller Street, a fender bender on the bridge, and Mr. Henderson is complaining about his neighbor's cat again. Standard Tuesday. Her tone was dry, imbuing even the most banal details with a hint of resigned amusement. Anya nodded, the routine a comforting counterpoint to the underlying hum of apprehension that always seemed to vibrate just beneath the surface of city nights. She preferred the predictable grit of street crime to the abstract anxieties that had begun to surface in her previous assignment. Those cases were different. But she pushed the thought away. Tonight was about the 14th Precinct and the ordinary rhythm of law enforcement. The clock on the wall ticked towards midnight. Anya took a sip of the lukewarm coffee, the taste as unremarkable as the hour. Suddenly, the fluorescent lights above them sputtered, a violent, erratic flicker that plunged the room into a disorienting strobe. The hum of the station's equipment died with a groan, and then silence. A profound, absolute silence that swallowed even the distant city sounds. It wasn't just a power outage, it was an absence, a void where the urban symphony usually played. What the hell? Lena breathed, her eyes wide, her pen hovering over the logbook. The desk lights, usually on battery backup, remained stubbornly dark. The emergency lights in the hallway flickered on, casting long, distorted shadows that danced like specters. Anya was already on her feet, her hand instinctively reaching for her sidearm. "Scanner, Lena." "What's the grid status?" Lena fumbled for the portable radio. Static, thick and suffocating, hissed from the speaker. "Nothing. It's dead. All frequencies are down." She tried another channel, then another. The same unnerving silence, broken only by the whine of static that sounded less like interference and more like a starved gasp. Then, the dispatch console, a beacon of constant activity, began to chime erratically. Not the usual steady tone for a call, but a chaotic, overlapping cacophony. Lights on the board flashed in a nonsensical sequence. Anya and Lena exchanged a look, a silent acknowledgement that this was far beyond a simple blackout. "Dispatch, this is Sharma and Petrova," Anya stated, her voice tight with controlled urgency. "What's going on?" "We're experiencing a total power loss and all comms are down." A choked, distorted voice crackled through the console, barely audible above the dying electronic wail. Figure in the street not move, just stare. The transmission cut out abruptly, replaced by the oppressive silence. "What was that?" Lena whispered, her usual composure fracturing. Before Anya could respond, another call registered, clearer this time, but no less disturbing. A woman's voice, strained and trembling, filled the small room. "Help me. It's in the alley behind my building. It's tall. Too tall. And it's not right. It's like a shadow that's come alive." The call ended with a choked sob and a sharp, wet sound. Anya felt a prickle of ice crawl up her spine. The hairs on the back of her neck stood on end. This wasn't noise complaints or cat disturbances. This was something else. The city, for all its familiar chaos, had just plunged into an alien darkness, and the calls flooding the now silent dispatch weren't about human problems. They were whispers of something else entirely, something that moved and watched when the lights went out. She looked at Lena, her gaze hardening. Gear up. We're going out there. Anya shielded her eyes against the intermittent glare of the patrol car's headlights, the beams cutting leak swathes through the pervasive darkness. Elm Street, usually a quiet, well-lit residential thoroughfare, was now a landscape of shadows. The house, number 17, was unmistakable. Its front porch light, the only one still stubbornly flickering, cast an unsteady, theatrical glow on the manicured lawn. Lena, her face etched with concern, stood beside Anya as they approached the residence. The silence here was not merely the absence of sound, it was an oppressive weight, a suffocating blanket that seemed to absorb any potential noise. The front door was ajar, a dark maw inviting them into the unknown. Anya pushed it open with her gloved hand, the wood groaning in protest. The interior was a tableau of disrupted domesticity. An overturned lamp lay on its side on the Persian rug, its shade askew, and a scatter of papers fanned out from a desk in the corner. But it was the floor itself that drew Anya's attention. A patch near the overturned lamp was slick with a dark, viscous substance that seemed to absorb the meager light. It wasn't blood, or at least, not blood as she knew it. It was thicker, with an iridescent sheen, like oil on water, but with a depth that suggested something far more substantial. "What is that?" Lena murmured, her voice barely a whisper. She carefully maneuvered around the substance, her flashlight beam playing over the floor. Anya knelt, examining the strange residue. It had a faint, acrid scent, like ozone mixed with damp earth. She collected a sample, carefully scooping a portion into a sterile evidence bag. No idea. Doesn't tea look like anything standard? She stood, her gaze sweeping the room. Whereas Mr. Chen? They moved through the house, room by room, their flashlights their only guides. The rest of the house was undisturbed, almost unnervingly neat, save for the area around the fallen lamp. No signs of forced entry, no obvious struggle beyond the overturned lamp and scattered papers. David Chen, the occupant, was nowhere to be found. His keys were on the hall table, his wallet on the kitchen counter. It was as if he had simply vanished into thin air. Anya noted the address. David Chen, mid-40s, apparently lived alone. The initial call had been from a neighbor, a Mrs. Gable, who lived across the street. Anya and Lena made their way to the Gable residence. Mrs. Gable, a woman whose normally cheerful face was now pale and drawn, clutched a tartan shawl around her shoulders, even though the night was not particularly cold. "He has gone," she stated, her voice trembling. "David. Just gone." "Mrs. Gable, can you tell us what you saw?" Anya asked, her tone gentle but firm. "It was just as the lights went out," she began, her eyes darting towards number 17. "David was out on his porch. I think he was watering his plants. Then, everything just died. The street lights, his porch light, everything. And then I saw it." "Saw what, Mrs. Gable?" Lena prompted. "A figure," she stammered, her voice barely audible. "Standing near David's porch. It was so tall, detective. Impossibly thin. Like a shadow stretched to its breaking point. It didn't have features. Just a shape. And it was still. Just there. Watching. Then, I heard a sound, like something being dragged, and then nothing. When the emergency lights finally came on, David's porch was empty, and his door was open." Anya listened intently, her mind cataloging the details. A tall, impossibly thin silhouette. The tar-like residue. The complete lack of any conventional evidence of abduction. This wasn't a simple missing person case. The blackout seemed to have been a catalyst, a curtain drawn back to reveal something that operated in the interstitial spaces of reality, something that left behind only a lingering scent and a disturbing stain. "Did you see where it went, Mrs. Gable?" Anya asked, though she already suspected the answer. "No, detective. It was there, and then it wasn't like it melted back into the dark." Anya looked back at the silent, shadowed house across the street. The familiar comfort of procedural law enforcement felt inadequate against this new, unsettling reality. The city was dark, and something unfamiliar was moving within it. The precinct, a bastion of order in a city teetering on the brink of chaos, felt strangely vulnerable. Back within its concrete shell, Anya and Lena found the residual hum of the blackout still palpable, a phantom limb of the city's lost power. The emergency lights, anemic and uneven, cast shifting pools of illumination that did little to dispel the encroaching gloom. The usual clatter of keyboards and the murmur of conversations were replaced by an unnerving quiet, punctuated by the strained sighs of officers grappling with their own unease. Officer Ben Carter, fresh-faced and brimming with textbook procedural knowledge, was pacing near the evidence locker, his brow furrowed. He was a stark contrast to the seasoned veterans like Anya, his youthful optimism not yet tempered by encounters that defied logical explanation. Had been on patrol during the initial blackout and had reported nothing out of the ordinary, chalking up the general disorientation to a city-wide panic. Just a mass hysteria event, Sharma, Ben stated, his voice carrying an edge of dismissal. He had a habit of referencing her by her last name, a subtle assertion of his own emerging authority. People are spooked. It's natural. Blackouts happen. Power grids fail. Nothing to write home about, no pun intended. Anya merely nodded, not bothering to engage. She'd heard it all before. The rationalizations, the dismissals, the insistent clinging to the known. She'd once been that cop, Ben's contemporary, but her tenure in the specialized unit had irrevocably altered her perspective. She'd seen things that the standard training manual simply did not cover. A low thud echoed from down the empty corridor leading to the interrogation rooms. It sounded like a heavy object had fallen, yet there was no one down that way. Ben's head snapped up, his eyes wide. What was that? Probably just the building settling, Anya said, her voice steady, betraying none of the unease that gnawed at her. She knew, however, that buildings didn't settle with such deliberate, heavy sounds in the dead of night. Moments later, a series of frantic whispers erupted from the front desk. Officer Miller, a veteran with 30 years on the force, was pale, his eyes darting towards the darkened windows. I thought I saw someone, he stammered, his hand trembling as he gripped the edge of the desk. Standing just outside. Tall. Thin. Watching. Then the lights flickered again, and it was gone. Ben scoffed. Miller, you're tired. We all are. This is going to take a while to sort out. Just get some coffee. But Anya felt it too. A palpable sense of being observed, not by a human eye, but by something ancient and predatory. She felt it in the way the shadows seemed to deepen and writhe at the periphery of her vision, and the subtle shifts of air pressure that made her skin crawl. It was a primal dread, the kind that bypassed rational thought and spoke directly to instinct. She'd felt it before, in the silent, desolate places where the veil between worlds was thin. Lena, ever observant, noticed Anya's subtle shift in posture. You feel it too, don't you, Anya? She murmured, her gaze sweeping the room with a newfound intensity. Anya met Lena's eyes, a silent understanding passing between them. Yes, she admitted, the single word heavy with unspoken implications. This isn't just a blackout, Lena. Something is here. As if summoned by their words, the emergency lights in the main bullpen flickered violently, then died, plunging the entire area into absolute darkness. A collective gasp went through the officers present. The silence that followed was broken only by the frantic, ragged breathing of those trapped in the oppressive black. Then, from the direction of the empty interrogation rooms, came the unmistakable sound of slow, deliberate footsteps echoing on the linoleum floor, each one a hammer blow against the strained nerves of the officers. They were not alone. The dispatch log, once a chaotic jumble of static and fragmented pleas, had begun to coalesce into a pattern of sorts. Multiple calls, originating from the derelict industrial sector on the city's fringe, reported similar phenomena: disembodied, rhythmic sounds that seemed to draw people. The descriptions were vague, cloaked in the fog of fear and the unnatural stillness of the blackout, but they all pointed towards the same grim locus. Anya and Lena, their patrol car crawling through the skeletal remains of forgotten factories, felt the oppressive quiet deepen with every mile. The air, thick with the metallic tang of decay and rust, seemed to hum with a low, almost imperceptible vibration. Lena adjusted the radio, trying to isolate the strange audio signatures that had intermittently cut through the static. It's not a siren, Anya. It's too low, too constant. Like a heartbeat, but wrong. They rounded a bend, the patrol car's headlights cutting through the oppressive dark, illuminating a scene that sent a chill deeper than the night air. A cluster of figures, perhaps a dozen or more, were gathered near the gaping maw of an old, disused textile mill. They were a motley collection, individuals who had clearly found their shelter within the forgotten corners of the city. But they weren't moving, not in any way that suggested conscious action. They stood or sat, heads tilted, eyes vacant, their faces eerily still, as if lost in a profound, dreamless sleep. Police! Get away from that building! Anya called out, her voice amplified by the bullhorn, though the sound seemed to be swallowed by the pervasive silence. No one reacted. The figures remained frozen, their gazes fixed on the darkened entrance of the factory. As Anya and Lena approached on foot, the low hum became more distinct. It wasn't just audible, it was felt. A deep, resonant vibration that seemed to seep into the very marrow of their bones, a physical pressure against their eardrums. It was a sound that bypasses interpretation, bypassing the brain, and speaking directly to some primal, dormant part of the nervous system. Lena held up a hand, her own face a mask of concern. Anya, I feel it. It's making my head swim. She took a step closer to the group, and Anya's hand shot out, gripping her partner's arm. Careful, Lena. Don't get too close. Anya's training screamed at her to maintain distance, to assess the threat, but the very nature of the threat was elusive. It wasn't a physical assailant she could apprehend, but an intangible force that seemed to manipulate the very senses. They cautiously approached one of the individuals, an older man with a grizzled beard and threadbare clothes. His eyes were open, but unfocused, staring intently at the factory entrance. Anya gently touched his shoulder. He flinched slightly, a barely perceptible tremor, but his gaze remained fixed. Sir? Are you all right? Can you hear me? Anya asked. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched the man's lips, but his eyes remained vacant. He didn't respond, didn't acknowledge her presence. It was as if he were submerged in a world only he could perceive, a world orchestrated by that low, pulsing thrum. It's like they're under some kind of spell, Lena observed, her voice tight. That hum, it's coming from inside. Anya nodded, her mind racing. The hum was undeniably the source. It was a lullaby, not of comfort, but of compulsion, drawing these vulnerable souls into the belly of the derelict structure. She recognized the danger instantly. These individuals, lost and susceptible, were being lured into what could only be a trap. The same ethereal force that had likely claimed David Chen was now preying on the city as forgotten. We need to get them out of here, Anya stated, her resolve hardening. This was not a simple evacuation, it was a rescue mission from an unseen enemy. The siren's lullaby was playing its deadly tune, and she was determined to break its hold. Back at the precinct, even amidst the lingering unease and the intermittent flicker of the emergency lights, Anya felt a surge of grim determination. The incident at the abandoned factory, while unsettling, had provided a tangible thread. Those mesmerized individuals, saved from whatever lurked within the humming darkness, were now in protective custody, their vacant stares slowly receding as they were revived from their unnatural slumber. But their accounts, once coherent, were a tapestry of fragmented images and sensations, too abstract to be useful in a standard report. Anya found herself drawn to the precinct's archives, a dusty labyrinth of forgotten cases in dried ink. She had a hunch, a nagging feeling that the current crisis wasn't an isolated event, but a recurrence. She bypassed the readily accessible files, her intuition guiding her towards the section marked restricted access, cold cases. Lena, recognizing Anya's focused intensity, followed without a word, her own experience with the inexplicable having eroded her skepticism. Hours melted away as Anya meticulously sifted through brittle folders. The names of the disappeared and the missing from her current case list began to align with entries dating back decades. Each file detailed disappearances that occurred during periods of significant electrical disruption. There was the inexplicable vanishing of a whole family during the '78 blackout, the unsettling case of a group of late-night shift workers who evaporated from a factory floor during a city-wide power surge in '92, and even a few anecdotal accounts from the early 2000s, swiftly buried under official dismissals. Most of these cases had been closed, relegated to the unsolved or suspected runaway categories, often accompanied by notes attributing the occurrences to mass hysteria, societal stress, or an unknown environmental factor. The official narrative was one of rational explanation, a comfortable blanket over the terrifying unknown. But Anya saw a different story etched in the dry report pages. She saw a pattern, a predatory cycle that synchronized with the city's descent into darkness. She pulled out a particularly old file, its cover brittle and yellowed, labeled Project Nightingale, Special Investigations Unit, Confidential. The date stamped on it was from the late 1960s. Inside, the reports were more detailed, more alarming. Unlike the sanitized accounts of later years, these early documents didn't shy away from the bizarre. They spoke of anomalous energy signatures, temporal disruptions, and entities observed during periods of grid instability. Flipping through the pages, Anya's breath hitched. She found a handwritten addendum tucked into the back of the file, scrawled in a hasty, almost frantic hand. It was a single sentence, underlined 3 times. It is the hungry dark, and it waits for the quiet hum. The hungry dark, Anya whispered, her voice barely audible. The phrase resonated with the low thrum she and Lena had experienced at the factory, with the descriptions of the figures observed during the blackout. This wasn't just a localized phenomenon. It was something ancient, something that fed on the absence of light, on the disruption of the familiar order. Lena peered over her shoulder, reading the note. The hungry dark? What does that even mean? Anya closed the file, the weight of its contents settling heavily upon her. It means, she said, her gaze distant, fixed on a point beyond the dusty shelves, that we're not just dealing with a power outage. We're dealing with something that has been here, and waiting, for a very long time. The implications were staggering. This wasn't a new threat, it was a resurgence, a predatory cycle that had resurfaced during the current, unprecedented blackout. The missing persons weren't just victims of circumstance, they were offerings to something that had been patiently biding its time in the shadows. The silence of the city was no longer a mere absence of noise, but a growing, gnawing void. The prolonged blackout, which the public was being fed reassurances about through garbled emergency broadcasts, was revealing its true, insidious nature. Anya, hunched over a series of increasingly frantic reports from the city's power grid authority, felt a cold dread bloom in her chest. These weren't just equipment failures, they were surgical amputations of the city's nervous system. Lena entered the makeshift command center the precinct had become, her face grim. She held a printout from a utility technician. They're pulling their hair out, Anya. Substation 7 just went down. Not a surge, not a short. They said it was like the energy just vanished. Drained. As if something sucked it dry. Anya tapped a finger on the table, her gaze unfocused as she pieced together the scattered fragments. The cryptic note from Project Nightingale, the strange hum drawing people, the disappearances during power disruptions, and now this. The pattern was not just about the absence of light, but about the absence of power itself. It's not just draining it, Lena, Anya said, her voice low and intense. It's feeding on it. The hungry dark isn't just a metaphor. It's literal. She recalled the unsettling reports from the industrial district, the way the derelict factory seemed to pulse with a low-frequency energy. This wasn't a creature of flesh and blood, it was something that subsisted on the very lifeblood of the city's infrastructure. She pointed to a map of the city, dotted with red markers indicating the failed substations. Look at the spread. It's moving, actively. Not randomly, but strategically. It's targeting the main arteries, crippling us systematically. It's like it's creating pockets of absolute void, where it can operate, where it can manifest. The word hung in the air, heavy with unspoken horror. Manifest. Not just observe, not just influence, but physically appear. Ben Carter, who had been diligently trying to establish contact with neighboring jurisdictions with no success, scoffed from his corner. Manifest? Sharma, with all due respect, we're talking about a massive electrical grid failure. We need to focus on restoring power, not chasing ghosts. His skepticism, once a youthful trait, now bordered on willful ignorance, a desperate attempt to cling to the familiar logic of their profession. Anya turned to him, her eyes sharp. Ben, look at the evidence. David Chen is gone. Those people in the industrial district were almost lost. The precinct itself flickered like a dying ember. This isn't a malfunction. This is an attack. And the power grid is its fuel. She explained her theory, her voice devoid of emotion, a detached professional detailing an impossible reality. The entity, whatever it was, thrived in the absence of directed energy. The more the grid failed, the stronger it became, the more it could exert its influence, pulling the vulnerable into its void, and perhaps, making its own horrifying existence tangible. So, what are you suggesting? Lena asked, her usual calm now tinged with a dawning apprehension. I'm suggesting that the failures aren't random, Anya replied, tracing a line on the map that connected the affected substations. They're deliberate. It's creating zones where it can operate with impunity. And if it's actively draining power, then it's not just waiting anymore. It's preparing to emerge. The implications were terrifying. If the grid continued to unravel, if these pockets of void expanded, it wouldn't be long before the entire city became its hunting ground. The flickering emergency lights of the patrol car cast an unsteady glow on the desolate access road leading to the city's main reservoir. Anya gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white. The data Lena had managed to pull from the remnants of the utility grid's monitoring systems was alarming. A massive energy surge, unlike anything they had ever recorded, was emanating from this exact location. It was the nexus, the heart of the pervasive blackout and the source of the chilling phenomena plaguing the city. The hungry dark, as Anya had begun to call it, was finally revealing its lair. They parked the car a mile out, the silence here profound, broken only by the distant, mournful sigh of the wind. The reservoir, a vast expanse of black water under the starless sky, seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy. The air thrummed with that same low-frequency hum they'd heard at the industrial district, amplified 1,000-fold, vibrating not just through the air, but through the very ground beneath their feet. As they approached the reservoir's edge, the darkness seemed to congeal. It wasn't simply an absence of light, it was a tangible substance, a shifting, coalescing mass of pure blackness. It writhed and pulsed, absorbing the scant light that dared to approach it. Tendrils of shadow snaked out from its core, coiling around the massive electrical conduits that snaked into the reservoir's pumping stations, drawing power with an insatiable hunger. The water itself seemed to dim, its surface losing its sheen, becoming as opaque and lightless as the entity itself. My God, Lena breathed, her hand instinctively reaching for her sidearm. Even her seasoned composure was faltering in the face of this impossible sight. Anya felt a primal fear claw at her throat, but her training, her oath, held it at bay. This was the culmination. This was what had been building, what had been lurking in the fringes of human understanding. The entity was not merely a byproduct of the blackout, it was actively orchestrating it, drawing sustenance from the city's very lifeblood. Then, they saw them. Figures, indistinct at first, began to emerge from the surrounding gloom, drawn inexorably towards the pulsating darkness. Not the mesmerized individuals from the industrial district, who had at least retained some vestige of their former selves, but something more hollow. They moved with a listless, desperate gait, their forms indistinct, almost spectral, as if their very essence had been leached away, leaving only a shell. They were being drawn in, absorbed into the shifting mass, their hushed moans lost in the overwhelming hum. Victims, Anya stated flatly, the word tasting like ash. It's consuming them. The entity wasn't just a drain on power, it was a predator, feeding on life itself, using the electrical conduits as its lures and the ensuing blackout as its hunting season. The disappearances, the chilling reports, the fragmented calls, they were all a prelude to this horrifying spectacle. Anya's mind raced. Project Nightingale, the old files, the cryptic note, they spoke of a recurring phenomenon, something that had been contained, or perhaps merely dormant, for decades. This was the core of it, the heart of the hungry dark. If this entity was allowed to fully feed, to fully manifest, the consequences for the city, for the world, were unimaginable. The encroaching darkness, the failing infrastructure, the disappearing citizens, it was all a symptom of a far greater, and far more ancient, threat. Lena raised her weapon, her gaze fixed on the swirling vortex of shadow. "What do we do, Anya? We can't just stand here." Anya scanned the perimeter, her eyes catching sight of a partially functional emergency generator humming feebly near one of the pumping stations. A desperate idea began to form, a Hail Mary born of sheer necessity. The entity fed on ambient energy, on the absence of directed power. Perhaps, just perhaps, a concentrated surge, an influx of raw, unadulterated energy, could disrupt it, repel it, even wound it. It was a long shot, a suicide mission, but standing by and watching it consume more lives was not an option. The duty to protect, ingrained in her very being, demanded action. The sky, previously an impenetrable canvas of black, began to bleed a faint, bruised gray at the horizon. The reprieve was agonizingly slow, a reluctant dawn that seemed to hesitate, as if afraid of what it might illuminate. At the reservoir, the Hun, though still powerful, was subtly changing, its rhythm faltering as power began to tentatively trickle back into the grid. Anya, Lena, and the handful of officers they'd managed to rally, a motley crew of the determined and the terrified, stood their ground, the wheezing emergency generator their only ally against the colossal manifestation of shadow before them. The entity, the hungry dark, writhed and pulsed, its form less cohesive than before, like a wounded beast lashing out. The tendrils that had snaked around the electrical conduits now recoiled, as if the returning energy was a poison. Yet, it still pulsed, a vortex of utter negation, seeming to draw the last vestiges of ambient energy, and with it, the fragile life force of the nearly lost victims still trapped within its periphery. "It's weakening," Lena shouted over the cacophony, her voice strained but clear. She had managed to rig a direct feed from the emergency generator, bypassing safety protocols and pushing its output to its absolute limit. The raw, unrefined electricity arced across the churning darkness, a desperate attempt to disrupt the entity's cohesion. Anya understood. The entity thrived in the void, in the absence of directed energy. The gradual restoration of the city's grid was both its salvation and its potential undoing. If it became fully re-established, the entity might find a way to integrate, to feed permanently. If it was repelled now, while weakened, there was a chance. "Ben, Miller. Get those portable floodlights rigged to the generator, direct them at the core." Anya barked orders, her voice hoarse but firm. She knew the risk the intense light might provoke the entity, make it more volatile. But they had to push it, force it to retreat. The encroaching dawn was their natural ally, but it was too slow. They needed an immediate, overwhelming surge. Ben, his earlier skepticism a distant memory, scrambled to obey, his movements jerky with adrenaline. He and Miller wrestled the bulky floodlights into position, their beams, thick and white, cutting through the oppressive gloom. The moment the lights hit the central mass of the entity, it recoiled with a sound that was not a roar, but a tearing, a rending of reality itself. The humming intensified, growing into a dissonant shriek that threatened to shatter eardrums. "It's not enough," Lena yelled, adjusting the generator's output. Sparks flew from the overloaded machinery. "We need more." Anya scanned the chaotic scene. The conduit lines, once tendrils of sustenance, were now sputtering, flickering erratically under the strain. An idea, reckless and born of desperation, seized her. "Lena, can you reroute auxiliary power from the main distribution hub? Just a controlled burst." Lena's eyes widened. "That's insane, Anya. It'll overload everything. We don't have another option." Anya countered. She saw it then, a faint shimmer in the distance, the first tangible rays of sunlight piercing the eastern sky. The entity, a creature of absolute darkness, was fundamentally vulnerable to the dawn. They just needed to buy time, to push it back, to give the sun its chance. With a grim nod, Lena began frantically working on her makeshift console. The officers, armed with standard-issue firearms, stood ready, a pathetic bulwark against the cosmic horror, but their presence was a symbol of defiance. They were law enforcement, sworn to protect, even when the threat was beyond comprehension. They were the thin line holding back the tide of oblivion. As Lena made the final connection, a blinding flash erupted from the reservoir. Not just the lights, but the very air seemed to ignite with a surge of raw, untamed energy. The entity shrieked, a sound that echoed with an agony that transcended mere physical pain. It convulsed, its form stretching and contorting, the inky blackness beginning to fray at the edges. The coalesced mass began to disperse, fragments of shadow peeling away, dissipating into the strengthening light. The victims, though still caught in its immediate periphery, stumbled back, their eyes slowly regaining a semblance of awareness, blinking in the harsh glare of the floodlights and the nascent dawn. The hum faded, replaced by the sputtering coughs of the generator and the distant, returning murmur of the city's awakening power grid. The entity, weakened and torn, was retreating, its insatiable hunger momentarily sated, or perhaps, rebuffed by the relentless power of the returning day. It wasn't destroyed, Anya knew. It had merely been driven back into the shadows, waiting for the next blackout, the next moment of weakness. But for now, for this fragile dawn, the city was safe. The city breathes again, a fragile dawn pushing back the suffocating dark. But the echoes of that night linger, a chilling reminder that some shadows are not merely an absence of light, but a presence waiting in the void. We faced something ancient, something that fed on our deepest fears, and though we stood our ground, the question of what lurks when the lights flicker remains. Thank you for joining us on this harrowing journey. What would you have done, faced with the choice between succumbing to the unnatural silence or fighting an enemy that fed on power itself? Share your thoughts and tell us your own whisper in the dark, right here on Dusty Whisper. Until next time, stay vigilant. We'll be back soon with the tale of a lone signal in the static, a message from a place that shouldn't exist.